Imagine a serene valley, lush with greenery, framed by rolling hills, and steeped in ancient history. This is the Jezreel Valley, often called the breadbasket of Israel, a land that once bore witness to one of the Bible's most extraordinary stories. At its heart lies Gideon's fountain, a peaceful spring where an army of thousands was reduced to a mere 300 men, all by a simple act involving water. But why? Why would God use something as ordinary as water to test soldiers before sending them into battle? What hidden lesson lies in the way a man drinks from a spring? These questions lead us to one of the most powerful demonstrations of faith and readiness in human history, a moment when divine strategy overcame impossible odds. Today we'll unravel this incredible story, traveling back to a time of deep oppression and unimaginable courage. You'll see how an unassuming leader, chosen by God, became a beacon of faith for an entire nation. And it all begins here in the Jezreel Valley, where history and faith converge in the most profound way. For 7 long years, Israel groaned under the weight of Midianite oppression. This wasn't a conventional occupation, it was a systematic dismantling of the people's way of life. The Midianites would wait until the crops were ready to harvest, then sweep through the land like locusts, stealing the grain, plundering livestock, and leaving nothing behind. Families hid in caves, clinging to scraps of food, while the once thriving fields lay barren and desolate. The Midianites, joined by the Amalekites and other nomadic tribes, brought not just famine but fear. Their numbers were overwhelming, described in the Bible as thick as locusts, with camels that seemed countless as the sand on the seashore. Imagine the despair of an entire nation watching their labor vanish year after year, unable to stop the relentless tide. But the oppression wasn't merely physical, it cut deeply into the spirit of the Israelites. Once a people defined by their covenant with God, they now lived in doubt and fear, questioning whether they had been abandoned. Many turned to idols, desperate for any semblance of hope, further distancing themselves from the God of their ancestors. This period of desolation wasn't accidental. The Bible describes it as a consequence of Israel's own unfaithfulness. Yet even in their suffering, God's plan was at work. This was a time of refining, a period to turn hearts back to Him. And just when the people were at their lowest, when their cries for deliverance were most desperate, God chose an unlikely hero to lead them to freedom. In a small village, amidst the chaos, a man named Gideon threshed wheat in secret, hiding from the Midianites. He was no warrior, just a farmer trying to protect what little remained. Unbeknownst to him, he was about to be called into a mission that would not only change his life but alter the course of his nation's history. Through Gideon, God would remind Israel of a profound truth. Deliverance doesn't come from human strength but from unwavering faith. Picture the scene: a humble farmer, alone, threshing wheat in a hidden winepress. The task was meant for open spaces, but fear of Midianite raiders forced Gideon to work in secrecy. Each swing of his hand spoke of quiet desperation, a man doing what he could to survive in a time when survival was far from guaranteed. And then the unexpected happened. An angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, addressing him with words that seemed almost ironic. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Mighty warrior? Gideon must have glanced around, confused. There was nothing mighty about his situation. He was from the weakest clan in Manasseh, and as he would later tell the angel, he was the least in his family. How could he possibly be called to lead? Gideon's response wasn't immediate acceptance, it was doubt. He questioned not just the angel's message but also God's presence. "If the Lord is with us," he asked, "why has all this happened to us? Where are all His wonders that our ancestors told us about?" His words echoed the despair of a nation that had felt abandoned. Yet the angel didn't rebuke him. Instead, he gave Gideon a mission: "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand." "Am I not sending you?" Despite the angel's assurances, Gideon's doubts lingered. He asked for signs, small miracles to confirm that this calling was real. The angel's fire consuming the offering Gideon prepared was one such sign, a moment of awe that hinted at the divine power behind this unlikely mission. And still, Gideon hesitated, feeling the weight of his inadequacy. Why did God choose someone so hesitant, so unsure of himself? It wasn't Gideon's strength or confidence that made him the right choice. It was his willingness to trust, even through his doubts. Gideon's calling wasn't about what he could do, it was about what God could do through him. This unlikely hero would soon take the first step of faith, one that would lead him and his people into the story of divine deliverance. Gideon's first mission from God wasn't to lead an army or engage in a grand battle. It was a personal test of courage and obedience. In the quiet of night, with fear in his heart, Gideon was called to confront the idolatry that had taken root in his own family. His father's household had built an altar to Baal, a symbol of the false gods that many in Israel had turned to during their despair. God's first command to Gideon was clear: tear it down. This was no small task. Destroying the altar would not only anger his family but could provoke the entire community. Baal worship wasn't just a religious practice. It was woven into the social fabric of their lives. To dismantle the altar was to challenge the very system they had come to rely on. Gideon understood the risk, yet he also knew that faith requires action, even when fear looms large. Under the cover of darkness, Gideon and a small group of men set to work. They dismantled the altar piece by piece and in its place, built a new altar dedicated to the Lord. On this new altar, they offered a sacrifice, a bold declaration that Israel's allegiance belonged to God alone. When morning came, the village awoke to chaos. People were furious, demanding to know who had committed this act. Gideon's name was soon revealed, and the crowd turned on him. But something remarkable happened. His father, Josh, came to his defense. "If Baal really is a god," Josh said, "he can defend himself." The crowd, unable to argue, dispersed. This moment marked a turning point for Gideon. Though his hands trembled as he tore down the altar, his obedience set a precedent for what was to come. Faith is often about taking the first step, even when the path ahead is uncertain. By destroying the altar, Gideon not only proved his own commitment to God but also planted a seed of hope in a nation that had forgotten its roots. In this simple yet profound act, we see that faith begins at home. Before Gideon could lead Israel to victory, he had to confront the idols in his own backyard. It's a reminder for us all that true change starts with courage and obedience in the small, personal battles we face. With the altar to Baal destroyed and faith rekindled in his village, Gideon was ready for the next step, assembling an army to face the Midianites. The task seemed impossible. The Midianite forces, along with their allies, had amassed in the Jezreel Valley. Their sheer number was staggering, described as thick as locusts, with camels so numerous they seemed to cover the earth. Against this overwhelming force, Gideon sent out a call to arms. Men from the tribes of Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali responded, gathering in numbers that must have surprised even Gideon. Soon he had an army of 32,000 soldiers, a significant force by human standards but still vastly outnumbered by the enemy. Yet God had other plans. Rather than relying on sheer numbers, God made it clear that this battle was about faith, not manpower. He told Gideon that the army was too large. If they won with so many soldiers, Israel might boast that the victory was achieved by their own strength. To ensure that the glory belonged to God alone, the ranks had to be thinned. The first test was straightforward. Gideon announced that anyone who was fearful or trembling should go home. Perhaps to his surprise, 22,000 men, more than two-thirds of the army, departed. Gideon was left with just 10,000 soldiers. It was a significant reduction, but God wasn't finished yet. Even with 10,000, the numbers were still too great. The second test was one of subtlety and symbolism. God instructed Gideon to take the men to a nearby spring and observe how they drank. Some soldiers knelt down and drank directly from the water, while others scooped the water to their mouths with their hands. Only 300 of the men drank with their hands, a gesture that symbolized vigilance and readiness. These 300 were chosen, the rest were sent home. Imagine the scene. Gideon stood with just 300 men, gazing out at an enemy that seemed uncountable. It was a moment of ultimate trust in God's plan. This wasn't just about reducing numbers, it was about refining the army to those who were spiritually and mentally prepared. Through this test, God demonstrated that victory doesn't come from human strength but from His power and purpose. The final test took place at a quiet spring near the Jezreel Valley, now famously known as Gideon's Fountain. It wasn't a test of strength, strategy, or military prowess. Instead, it was an act as simple and unassuming as drinking water. A moment where God would reveal who among Gideon's men were truly ready for the divine mission ahead. Gideon brought the remaining 10,000 men to the spring as instructed by God. Here they were observed as they drank from the water. Most of the men knelt down, placing their faces directly into the stream, focused solely on quenching their thirst. But a smaller group, a mere 300, scooped the water into their hands, drinking while standing upright, their eyes alert to their surroundings. This act of drinking might seem insignificant, but its symbolism was profound. Those who knelt fully and buried their faces in the water reflected a lack of vigilance. In contrast, the 300 who remained upright, drinking with their hands, displayed an alertness and readiness for action. It was a subtle yet significant distinction, one that separated the spiritually prepared from those who might falter in the trials ahead. God made it clear to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." Imagine the weight of this moment for Gideon. Already reduced from 32,000 to 10,000, his army now stood at just 300 against an enemy described as innumerable. But this was no ordinary battle, it was a divine demonstration, a statement that victory belongs not to those with the greatest numbers but to those with the greatest faith. The fountain, still flowing today, stands as a reminder of this pivotal moment in history. It whispers a truth that echoes through the ages. God often works through the small and the humble to accomplish the extraordinary. The water test was more than a strategy, it was a refining process, stripping away self-reliance and leaving only those whose hearts were fully dependent on God's power. With the 300 chosen, Gideon was no longer leading an army by human standards. This was a force of faith, a symbol of God's ability to turn the weak into mighty warriors. The water at Gideon's fountain didn't just separate men, it defined their readiness to trust in the unseen and walk into impossible odds. With only 300 men under his command, Gideon faced a daunting task. The enemy forces camped in the Jezreel Valley were not only vast but well-equipped, their numbers described as thick as locusts. Victory seemed impossible by conventional standards, but this was no ordinary battle. God's plan was not to match the enemy's strength but to reveal his power through an unconventional strategy. Gideon's men were armed with no swords or shields, but with trumpets, clay jars and torches. These simple items would become the tools of one of the most dramatic and miraculous victories in biblical history. By human logic, such a plan was absurd, but it was through this very absurdity that God's might would be displayed. As night fell, Gideon divided his 300 men into 3 groups, positioning them around the Midianite camp. In the stillness of the night, they waited, the torches hidden within the jars to mask their approach. At Gideon's signal, they acted in unison, breaking the jars to reveal the torches, blowing their trumpets and shouting, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The sound of shattering jars, blazing torches and blaring trumpets echoed through the valley, creating chaos among the Midianites. The sudden noise and light from all directions caused panic and confusion. The Midianite soldiers, believing they were under attack by a massive force, turned on one another in the darkness. Friend became foe and the camp descended into disarray. As the Midianites fled in terror, Gideon's 300 pursued them, driving them out of Israel's territory. Despite their small number, the Israelites achieved a resounding victory without ever lifting a sword in direct combat. This was not a triumph of strategy or skill, it was a divine intervention, a battle won by faith and obedience. The story didn't end with the enemy's defeat. After the initial victory, the remaining Israelites joined the pursuit, reclaiming their land and their faith. God's grace allowed the entire nation to share in the deliverance, even those who had been hesitant or afraid. This victory was more than just a military success, it was a testament to God's power working through human weakness. Gideon's story is a reminder that faith, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can lead to extraordinary outcomes. The battle in the Jezreel Valley wasn't just a story of war, it was a declaration of trust in a God who makes the impossible possible. The story of Gideon and the 300 isn't just an ancient tale of victory, it's a narrative rich with lessons that transcend time. At its heart lies a message of trust, humility, and faith in the unseen. Gideon's journey reminds us that God often works through the unexpected, using ordinary people and simple actions to achieve extraordinary results. Consider the significance of the water test at Gideon's fountain. It wasn't about physical prowess or skill, it was a test of readiness and vigilance. In our lives, we may not face armies as Gideon did, but we encounter moments where our faith is tested in the smallest of actions. How we respond to these seemingly insignificant decisions can define our readiness to embrace God's plan. Gideon's story also teaches us about the power of obedience. His first act of faith, tearing down the altar to Baal, was done in fear and secrecy, yet it set the stage for a public victory. Often, the first steps of faith are the hardest, requiring courage to go against the grain of societal expectations or personal fears. But those steps can lead to transformative outcomes. The victory over the Midianites stands as a testament to God's strength being made perfect in human weakness. Gideon's 300 men were outnumbered, under-equipped, and untrained, yet they triumphed not because of their might but because they followed a divine plan. It's a reminder that our limitations don't hinder God's ability to work through us. In fact, they often highlight His power all the more. Today, Gideon's fountain is a peaceful place, visited by families and pilgrims alike. It flows quietly, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battle it once witnessed. Yet, its waters still carry the story of faith and readiness, urging us to reflect on our own spiritual posture. Are we drinking from life's fountains with alertness and purpose, ready to respond to God's call? As we navigate our own challenges, may Gideon's story inspire us to trust in the unseen, take bold steps of faith, and remember that true victory comes from aligning our hearts with God's purpose. The story may have unfolded thousands of years ago, but its message is as relevant today as it was then. The story of Gideon and the 300 stands as a timeless reminder of the power of faith, courage, and humility. From a humble beginning as a reluctant leader to achieving a miraculous victory, Gideon's journey reveals that God's strength shines brightest in human weakness. It's a story that calls us to trust in the unseen, to take bold steps of obedience, and to remember that the smallest actions, guided by faith, can lead to extraordinary outcomes. As we reflect on the lessons of Gideon's fountain, we're reminded that life often presents us with moments of testing. These tests, though simple in appearance, hold profound meaning. They refine our character, shape our readiness, and deepen our reliance on a power far greater than ourselves. Gideon's story encourages us to embrace these moments, knowing that every act of faith, no matter how small, contributes to a greater purpose. Today, the Jezreel Valley and Gideon's fountain are peaceful places, but their history speaks volumes. Visiting these sites is a tangible way to connect with the biblical narrative and draw inspiration from the courage and faith of those who came before us. The waters of the fountain still flow, reminding us of the vigilance and trust that defined Gideon's army and brought victory against impossible odds. As you go about your journey, may Gideon's story inspire you to face challenges with faith, to trust in the plans that may not always make sense, and to take that first bold step toward your own victories. The same God who empowered Gideon and his 300 stands ready to guide you through whatever battles you face today. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and explore more incredible narratives from biblical history. Share this video with others who might need a reminder of the power of faith and the triumph that comes from trusting in God's plan. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, may your steps be guided by courage and your heart filled with faith.